everyone. Thank you for tuning in. So today I'd like to talk about one of my favorite research studies, and I feel like I've already said that like every episode so far, but I guess I just have a lot of favorites, right? Like there's no limit to how many favorite studies you can have, is there? Anyways, I want to talk about a study that you may have heard about. It looks at happiness levels between lottery winners and paraplegics, which are people who have they're paralyzed, and the paraplegics they looked at were ones that became paraplegics later in life, like following an accident. So I want to talk about this because one, it's super interesting, and two, because I do think that the results from the study are sometimes a little bit misrepresented because it's not straightforward, but when you're just kind of given a one-line sentence, it's quite easy to summarize the results as, winning the lottery or being in an accident doesn't matter because happiness returns to normal. And that's not quite right. It's not quite right. There's some truth to that, but I kind of want to clear that up a little bit, and then I want to talk a bit about, what this study tells us about happiness and about whether or not happiness is relative and to what extent our circumstances impact our happiness levels, which is, the perennial question, really. So, among important questions. So, let me just talk a little bit about the study first. So, this study, famous study done in 1978, it looked at 22 lottery winners. There was 22 controls, so people who weren't lottery winners or accident victims, and then there were some accident victims. I think it was 29. I could check, but it wasn't exactly 22, but it was around there. And one thing to mention here is that the study looked at accident victims who'd already been, because clearly in this kind of study you can't say, okay, like you guys are going to win the lottery, you guys over there, you're going to have an accident, right? So it's observational, and you have to kind of work with the data you have. So they had to find people who had already, become paralyzed or who had won the lottery, and then, see their happiness now and how it was before, and yada, yada, yada. So I don't want to go too much into like how the study was done, but I want to go more into the results. So what the results found was, when it comes to the lottery winners, it was essentially kind of what you might have heard reported, which was immediately following the win, the people were happier, obviously, but, after 6 months or so, at least 6 months, all of them had returned to approximately their baseline levels of happiness, and they were basically just as happy as the control group who had never won the lottery. So that's interesting. Now, the second part of the study, when we speak about the paraplegics, this is where I think the messaging that's come across has been a little bit muddled. And so what they found with the paraplegics is that the paraplegics were less happy than they were before the accident, but their happiness was kind of overall the same as the other two groups. So what does that mean? Okay. So basically what happened with both the lottery winners and with the paraplegics is they changed what their level of normal was, what they felt like it was a normal lifestyle. So with the lottery winners, what they found was that lottery winners actually enjoyed day-to-day kind of like mundane activities, like washing the dishes. I don't know, maybe lottery winners don't wash the dishes. Anyways, walking the dog, just having a meal, just very basic things. They found less pleasure in that than the control group did. And so this can be interpreted, even though they were just as happy as the control group. So the thing was, their baseline was their baseline became elevated after winning the lottery. Like luxury, a more luxurious lifestyle became their normal. So things that were enjoyable before now were not as enjoyable in comparison, right? So they just adjusted what their baseline was, what they expected, right? Because if you get what you expect, you're like, oh, okay. But if you get more than you expect, you're extra happy. You get less than you expect, you're sad. That's kind of a simplification, but that kind of sums up the gist of that. So when it came to the paraplegics, though, even though in the present they were about as happy as the other two groups, they were happier before. And that's not because they actually were happier before. It's because they were romanticizing the past. And they knew that, the researchers came to that conclusion because controls who had the similar lifestyles as the paraplegics before they were in an accident, they were less happy than the paraplegics remember being. So if you've watched one of my other episodes where I talk about happiness and why we're bad at predicting our future happiness, I talk a lot about memory and about how our memories are pretty bad. We remember things that don't happen. One of my favorite studies is the one where researchers got people to remember being lost in the mall as a kid when that never happened, but they legitimately remembered it. And you know what? If we were in that study, we would remember that too, because our memories are not video recorders. They're like pieces of art that we're constantly like molding, right? Our memories change. And so when we remember, especially our life as a whole, this is something I also talked about, so I won't go into too much detail, but if you're interested, go check out that video. But essentially, we remember the so-called big moments of our lives, but we don't remember like the small details. So we don't have a accurate reflection. Like we'll remember getting married, we'll remember, graduating, but we won't remember like the small day-to-day things of our lives. So when somebody who's a paraplegic, they look back at their life, they are remembering like the things that were different, the big things that they can't do now. Like they'd be thinking about, running and all the things they can't do, but they're not remembering the things that really haven't changed because, of course, their lives are different, but there's a lot of things that they can enjoy just as much. Like they can listen to music, eat food. I'm not an expert on this, but there's a lot, but they're not thinking about those things. They're thinking about the different things and they're romanticizing. And so, but their happiness, so they've reconstructed the past, and now in comparison with the past, they're less happy. So that's kind of what has happened. And that's really interesting. And that's good news because it doesn't have to be that way. There's other studies that have looked at people with disabilities, and on average, they found that people with disabilities are just as happy as normal people. Some studies have found maybe not as much, but some have found just as happy. And another thing is that we think that people with getting a disability would make us less happy than it would. There was one study where researchers asked participants about whether they would want to have a certain disability. I think there were 72 disabilities or something. And people said they would rather be dead than have us. It was like, I think not even disability, like a chronic illness or condition. People said they'd rather be dead. But then again, there's a lot of people living with these diseases. So, like, what's going on? The truth is we think something's going to be much worse than it would be. Because when we picture, it's the same kind of thing. When we picture having a disability or picture winning the lottery, we're not thinking about what life would actually be like. And that's why we think it would make us happier than it would. Like, for example, if I'm thinking about becoming a lottery winner. Okay, so I guess I'm thinking about the moment of winning the big prize, which would obviously be exciting, but that moment passes. Then maybe I'm thinking about, all the cool, actually I'm not a big handbag person, I don't know, all the cool clothes I could buy, right? Or the fancy car or something. But, we probably all know this, but the pleasure we gain from material purchases, I'm not anti-material purchases, but that happiness does wear off, and we do get more happiness and pleasure from experiences than from material purchases in the long run. So those things would wear off, but I'm thinking about those things, right? When I think about becoming a lottery winner. But what I'm not thinking about is the things that really aren't that different, like my friends and family. If anything, sometimes it's actually worse to become a lottery winner because then you're not sure if somebody's using you or they want to be your friend just because of your money, right? That's a real thing. Same thing with celebrities. Eating meals isn't, unless I'm going to be eating fancier food that's way better. That's not really going to change if I was a lottery winner. Most aspects of our lives would not change. It does make a difference if you are moving from abject poverty to becoming a lottery winner. That's a whole other conversation. But this is assuming that you're starting from a baseline level of a comfortable lifestyle where you have all the basic kind of necessities met. So that's why people think they'd be much happier than they would be. And then the same is true when we think about becoming a paraplegic. We would think about what would be different and what we couldn't do instead of thinking of the same things we could do. And also, what we don't think about is the things that we could do, but we could do differently. And you know what? I'm not even going to go into that because I don't know too much about that, but there's things that we can do differently. And once something has happened too, we're going to look for those positives and we're going to get used to our new circumstances. And a lot too of what we a lot of our happiness, I'll maybe just kind of end on this note. Happiness in large part, so we get used to things, right? And why is that? It's because a lot of happiness is us responding to changes, right? And what I mean by that is when there's a change in our environment, if it's a positive change, we'll become happy. If it's a negative change, we'll become sad. That's kind of a simplification, but that's the general idea. And that makes sense if you think about, evolution. And I love evolutionary psych explanations, which you'll probably find if you watch any more videos. But it makes sense because if something positive happens, we want to have like a positive mood, a burst of dopamine to encourage us to keep doing that thing. And if we have, a negative mood, we learn not to do that. Like, for example, if, in terms of a positive, what about, I dress up really nicely, I guess, one day, and I get a compliment from a boy I like, I guess, right? I feel really good about that, right? I feel good because of that praise. And I'll feel good, and that makes sense because it's a good thing to be getting positive feedback from other people. That is, in terms of our evolution, we're wired to be social, and having a high social status, having people like us is really important, right? But then at a certain point, if I get used to that, like for example, say I become like a model or something, which I won't be, but if one was a model, if you keep getting the same feedback all the time, you're not going to keep getting happy because you're not learning anything, right? Like the function of our moods and our emotions are for us to learn. And so if we just keep getting the same like positive feedback for something that's just happening all the time, we're not learning anything. So it's when something changes, that's when we get that feedback, right? Same with if something negative happens, like if I really annoy somebody and they say something mean to me, like I get that feedback, I feel bad. I'm like, okay, I won't do that again. Even though I don't think that to myself, that's what our body, we encode that message, right? So we're constantly reacting to our environments, but once something becomes stable, we get used to it. And so people are motivated by money, for sure. I mean, we're motivated by a lot of things, but people are motivated by money, and it makes sense because more money, more resources, it's objectively a good thing in terms of if we look at evolution and, we're wired to want to seek resources for ourselves, for our people that we care about. But so imagine you've attained the resources. You get that promotion at work. You're going to have that burst of dopamine because that's your body telling you, good job, you did it, congrats. But you're not going to continue feeling good about that promotion for like 5 years because you've already got the promotion, so your body is going to get used to that. That's the new normal. And then now you're going to need another promotion to get that next burst, right? And that's why, Buddhism, they talk about this wanting mind. And we're always wanting more because we're driven that way. We've evolved to constantly be trying to improve ourselves. And that's why we can't really feel happy all the time. It wouldn't be very productive in terms of evolution. And also, I'm going to get a bit off topic now, but if you'll just indulge me a little bit, imagine if we were happy all the time. I mean, I'd be all for it, but there would be some downsides. For one, negative emotions, they serve a real purpose. I'll give a really basic example, but if we can concede that like anxiety is a negative emotion, anxiety is vigilance. And back in the savannah days, it's important to be vigilant because there could be a lion around the corner. So if you were just happy all the time back then, you just weren't worried, you're like, I'm just having a time, like chillax everyone, you'd be done, right? So it's actually not really in our, maybe now, like that's not as much of a problem, but even now, you don't want to be not vigilant at all, because you do need to be aware of your surroundings. There's danger out there, maybe not lions, or maybe, I don't know, maybe if you work at the zoo, but different danger. So we do need to be vigilant in that way. And another thing is that having the positive emotion intermittently, it motivates us to do those positive things, right? So that wouldn't be in our best interest if we were just in a good mood all the time, because we'd be then happy just like chilling out and like doing nothing, and that's not really, in terms of evolution, we haven't evolved that way either, right? And I think those are the main reasons. And also, in a sense, that dissatisfaction, like I kind of said, it just keeps us striving. So we're not going to be happy all the time. So it's kind of that catch-22, but that's why we would if we become a lottery winner at first, we're like, oh my gosh, we get that burst. We're like, now I'm a winner. Now I've made it. Until like we're like, okay, I'm used to being it. So like now let's be like a super winner. Like let's next level. And there's a study I'd like to talk about here. I think this really kind of like drives the point home. So for humans, success and status, it's really about it's all relative. So you've probably read studies where they say that find above an income of 70,000 or 80,000, I've seen different numbers cited, happiness, it just kind of like, it levels off. Like you need a certain amount, everybody agrees, of material wealth to be comfortable, and if you don't have that, you're going to be unhappy. If you're starving, you're going to be unhappy. If you are afraid every second that your kids are going to be like in physical danger, you're going to be unhappy. I mean, if we want to talk about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the little pyramid, the very bottom, we have our base needs. We have, water, food, I think sex. I don't really know why sex actually is at the base one, but whatever. We have like sex, we have all those base needs, and we have like shelter, security. Security is the next one. Then I think we have love and love and friendship and companionship and relationships, and then there's self-esteem, and there's self-actualization, right? So you really can't get up to that self-actualization, that like, pinnacle, if that's the pinnacle happiness, until you have your basic needs satisfied, right? So once we have the 70, 80,000, generally people have said that, okay, you don't get it much happier. The thing is, though, you do, but it's not about what the extra money can buy you. Because it's not about the things, because you're right, after 70, 80,000, you don't, like having a designer purse, it's not the actual purse that makes you happy. Like having an apple, if you're starving, that actually makes you happy because you need that apple. The purse, it's not about the purse, it's about what the purse signifies. It's not the purse that makes you happy, it's the boost in social status. Arguably, if you get that boost in social status, that's what makes you happy. And why, I think one reason why people have said, they keep repeating after 70,000 you don't become happier, is because they have done things like look at happiness between countries, and they say, okay, happiness is kind of like about the same, even though some countries are richer than others, so yeah, it must not matter because, people in this country are making 100,000 and people over here are making 80,000, but they're all the same happiness. Doesn't matter. But it does, because if you look in the country, it will matter between people of different economic groups in the country, right? And same thing if you look at, okay, like over the past, 50 years, wealth, I think, has like more than doubled in North America, but happiness hasn't really, if anything, it's gone down. Depression's gone up, that's for sure. Loneliness has gone up. So if we're more wealthy, but we're not more happy then, but the thing is, it's all about its relativity. And so it also matters who you live around, because even if you're in that country and you're the top 1% in the country, if you're living on a road where everybody around you is top 0.5%, you're not going to be very happy, relatively speaking. I mean, maybe you'll be happy for other reasons, but when it comes to your status, you're not going to go around thinking, oh, I'm so great, I'm 1%, look at me. You're going to be like, oh man, Steve over there, like, look at his Lamborghini, it's so much better than my Porsche. I hope I got that right, that a Lamborghini is better than a Porsche. I don't know too much about cars. But, the point is that you're going to be comparing yourself to other people. So really, it matters who you're around. And I've heard the rule of thumb, I'm not sure exactly how accurate this is, but the person that people tend to compare themselves to as like a heuristic is your wife's sister's husband. So I guess if you are the husband, if I imagine I'm a husband, my wife's her sister's husband, how much he makes. So it's somebody in your social circle that you compare yourself to, but not directly, because that's the key, because we want our family members and people really close to us to do well. But he's like, that person that I mentioned, I won't keep repeating it, it's kind of tricky. He's a bit removed, right? And so maybe I'll just finish off with one last study. Hopefully you're not too tired, too sick of them yet. But there was one study where they looked at different like law firm partners, and they were making different amounts. And essentially, like they would get upset over like trivial amounts. And I should pull up some numbers, but like these law firm partners, they're making a lot of money. Like it's over $500,000, maybe it was in the millions. And they're upset because the guy next door is making $10,000 more. And the thing is, it's not about the money, right? It's the fact that money signifies that person is higher in social status or that they're better at their job. Not that they actually are, but it seems like that's the signal that's being sent by them being paid more. And that's what's upsetting. They feel like it's not that they need that, of course they don't need that $10,000, but it's feeling like they're losing. And other studies have been done where they've asked people, like, would you rather be, they give them two scenarios, and in one scenario, that person is making more money, but they're not, like, they're either, like, average or they're below average compared to what everyone else is making. So let's imagine, this isn't the exact study, but this gives you the gist of it. So say the average, you're making $50,000, and yeah, you're making $50,000, and the average amount that people are making is $60,000. No, actually, I have to make it a bit higher. Let's say you're making $80,000, and the average amount that people make at your company is $90,000. So that's option A. Option B, you're making $70,000, but the average amount people are making is $60,000. So in option A, you're making more money, but you're below the average. Option B, you're making less money, but still it's comfortable, right? 80 versus 70, let's assume they're both comfortable standards of living, but you're making more than average. People will pick the second one, right? So that just goes to tell you that it's about the relativity that makes a difference. And there was a study that's been released recently, by recently I mean 2021, and it does show that actually making more money past that, like this study, it used the $80,000 threshold, it makes a difference. It does make people happier. And I think people have been reticent. That information has been out there it didn't just come out in 2021. Like, I've known about this before. But people don't really want to report it because everybody likes this narrative of, like, money doesn't make you happy, and money doesn't make you happy, but status makes you happy, which maybe is worse. I don't know. Is that a worse conclusion? But, maybe it doesn't. It's a whole other topic about whether it needs to, and there's ways that you can not get caught up into that rat race. You can be around different people. You can think differently about things. You can choose to value different things. But just on average, especially if you're in those communities where everybody makes a lot of money, not always, but, in general, those people are going to value status because they valued it enough to get there. Not all of them. Maybe they just, like, they love mergers and acquisitions, like that is their passion. It's not even about the money. Actually, I'm sure tons of people do love mergers and acquisitions, which is a law thing in case you're not aware. But for a lot of those people, status is important. And if you're being judged on your status, like, of course you're going to care, right? Because we care what other people think about us. But if instead we lived on, like, a hippie commune where everyone's sharing, like, it might be uncool then to care about status, right? And that's why some studies show that in countries where economic inequality, so, like, the difference is less, the overall country's happiness is more. And that's kind of the case right now in North America. There are people in abject poverty, which is, a tragedy and something we need to work on. But a lot of the unhappiness isn't even about the poverty. It's about the people who aren't even poor, but they aren't absolutely poor in that they can afford the necessities, but comparatively, compared to the super elite rich, they are. And it's that comparison that's making people unhappy. And people make this worse for themselves too by going on Instagram and comparing themselves. I mean, you've probably heard this all the time, but studies actually back it up that social media, when you use it to compare yourself, and if you use it to chat with friends, that's different and that can be positive. But if you use it to compare yourself, it makes you less happy. It does. And, people say just don't compare yourself to others, but it is human nature to do that. And so if you find yourself looking at those models and feeling bad, don't feel bad that you're doing it. It's not like you can just decide, okay, I'm not going to compare myself. It's kind of like a natural response. There's different things you can do, but one of the easiest things you can do is you can just stop looking at it, right? Because our happiness, it depends on who we compare ourselves to, who we're around. So here's an idea. You go become homeless, and then you'll be the richest. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. But if you did live among people who maybe valued, material things less, and maybe some people flaunt it more too, right? You could be around really rich people, but if they don't rub it in your face, it might not be a big deal. But if people are constantly bringing it up and you're, like, at the bottom, that's that's clearly not good. That's not going to be good for your mental health, right? So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Started off talking about the lottery and paraplegic study, and then we ended talking about kind of like happiness and wealth, and it's a tricky one. It really is. Money and happiness. It's you know what? Maybe I think I'll talk about that in another episode because there's much more to say. But I hope everybody enjoyed that. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts. Anything you'd like me to talk about. Yeah, I'd love to hear any feedback. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope to, or I hope you've seen me, I guess, in the next episode. Okay.